Hello, everyone, and on behalf of everybody here at Insum, I'd like to warmly welcome you to this special Insum webinar on APEX and ORDS for DBAs and System Admins by Rich Soule. Rich received the Best of ODTUG Kscope 23 APEX Session Award for this presentation at Kscope in June, so you know that you are in for an excellent session. As always, we're totally thrilled to have you here, and we thank you for attending. And my name is Mark Ruel from the Insum Sales Department, and I'll be your moderator. And I invite you to post your questions in the comment section, and we'll address them as they come along. Rich Soule is the Director of Consulting at Insum, and he has 36 years of experience in IT and 17 years with APEX, and even more web development experience with APEX's predecessors, WebDB and HTMLDB. He has worked extensively at Oracle as a sales consultant, as a business development manager, as a product manager, a solution architect, all of which have conferred him with an intimate knowledge of Oracle products. And Rich continued his consulting career outside Oracle, and notably as a principal at C2 Consulting out of Boston, which Insum acquired in 2018. And we are very glad to have him today. And now let's start the presentation. Rich?
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. One of the things about this presentation is we did schedule it for an hour. However, of the feedback that I got during Kscope, one of the only negative comments was, hey, this could have been longer. And I actually had more content than I could have presented at Kscope. And what we've decided to do today is actually just deliver all the content, including giving time for people to ask questions and that type of stuff during the presentation. Since this is going to end up on YouTube, my hope is that it becomes a reference for people going forward. And consequently, if you can only be here for an hour, duck out after an hour. And that's totally fine. You can always find the recording of this and the rest of the content that is that I'm going to present today, so you can follow up on it. One of the most important things about this presentation is on the bottom of that slide there. All the code from every slide can be found at that URL, GitHub Richard Soule, and then the name of the presentation. And so all the code from every single slide is there. So you don't have to take screenshots and try to remember all of this type of stuff. And you never have to type any of this stuff in. You can just go there. There's a big text file. That text file has all the code on all the slides. So doing APEX and ORDS is as easy as 1, 2, 3. All you have to do is install APEX, install ORDS, then just take a break and you're done. And that's it. We're done today. So the presentation is over. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. And that was the joke that I used when I was at Kscope. But the reality is that there is an awful lot of things to think about when you are setting up APEX and ORDS. And the goal of this presentation was to map out all of these things so that somebody could understand how and what they should be doing when they set up APEX and ORDS. Since this is targeted towards DBAs and system admins, I wanted to take a little bit of a break before we go into the presentation and just talk about how your database should be set up. We assume that you have a database up and running, and the objective is to get APEX and ORDS into that database. But I do look at a lot of people's servers, and I often see stuff where, hey, it's not patched, it's not in an OFA compliant home, they haven't configured the read-only home, they haven't recompiled binaries for unified auditing. So I put together some notes here specifically for DBAs. If you're going to be in the situation where you are installing the database software and you're patching it and maintaining it, these are some of the things that you could do. And I also put together some ideas on actually creating the database. I think all databases that you create going forward should be multi-tenant. You should never do standalone ever again. In 23C, you will only be able to do multi-tenant. And then I have some naming suggestions, character set suggestions. You should use Oracle Managed Files, archive log. Setting the max string size to extended, that's something that you should do to your database. You need to put your database in upgrade mode before you do it. And then, of course, setting the in-memory force, as long as your database is 19.8 or higher, gives you a free 16 gigs of the in-memory feature of the Oracle database, which is quite awesome. So these are some little ideas to do before you set up your database. So let's get started and talk about the actual stuff of what's going on for this process. So what we're going to cover today is 3 things. And actually, since we have extra time today, we're going to cover actually 6 things, but the 3 things. Installing the APEX component. And I honestly believe that every single DBA should do this in every single database, period, end of story. And if you don't have the APEX component in your database as a DBA, then I think you are dropping the ball. Next, we'll look at how we can allow developers and applications that are built inside of the database to reach outside of the database to stuff that's available outside of the database. Could be another database somewhere. It could be a web page or something like that, or a REST service that you need to integrate with. And then finally, we'll look at step 3, which is enabling access into the database through ORDS. So while I think the first step is something every DBA should always do 100% of the time, the next 2, you could technically argue are optional, but obviously if you want to use the full power of APEX and ORDS, you would do those steps too. So this presentation was designed for all the people who say, hey, I don't know what to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the database before you do anything. So before you install APEX, there are a number of schemas here. Now, some of you might have like 29 rows or 30 rows. This is a pluggable database inside of an Oracle multi-tenant. I don't have the admin user. And I actually also removed the Oracle multimedia extension from the database since it is no longer supported in the database anymore. So you might have a few more users, not the end of the world. But basically what we wanted to do is see, hey, the database comes with all of these users in it. What components are in the database?
Oh, I'm sorry, Rich. We have a question from Angel Torres, and he asks if this presentation will be useful for Oracle XE Edition.
Yes, actually, everything here would apply to Oracle XE also. Yeah. So the components that are inside of the database, if you look at it, again, you might have 13 if you have Oracle Multimedia also in there, but when I set up this database, I didn't set it up with that. And there's about 11,550 synonyms. Again, your synonyms might be different if you still have Oracle Multimedia in your database. So that's what's in the database. How is the database physically arranged? We've got some table spaces, right? So, and the table spaces take up some size. So this is all before APEX and or ORDS is installed in the database. So this is kind of a naked Oracle database. So what we're going to do is look at the first step, installing the APEX component. And this is the type of thing, you know, at Kscope, lots of people come to Kscope, they see these awesome Apex things, they go back to their DBA and they say, hey, I saw Apex, it looks really cool, can you just set it up? And, you know, unfortunately these days, a lot of DBAs say no. You know, they say, oh, it's a security issue. Apex is just a database component. I've never done it. It's too complicated. They give you all the reasons why they can't do it. This presentation is designed to be given to a DBA that is reluctant to set up Apex so that they can understand exactly what's happening inside of the database. So let's take it. First question you're going to have is, if you do have a multi-tenant database, and you should you install it in the root container or the pluggable? And the answer is, it really should be installed in the pluggable. When I showed this presentation to Chris Rice, he said, yeah, take out that almost, right? If you are starting a company to host Apex instances similar to apex.oracle.com type of thing, in theory, you might do a root container install. The reality is that by far, most of us are installing Apex inside of the pluggable and not in the root container. So step one, let's go get Apex, right? I just Googled download Oracle Apex, or you could go to apex.oracle.com, download, and what you're going to see is 3 different links, one for Apex, one for English only Apex, and then a patch set bundle if it's available. So like when 23.2 comes out, you know, for a couple of weeks, there won't be a patch set bundle. After that, there will be. So what I do is I always do the all languages, but if you really had something that was just English, you could use the second link, but I just go up to the first link, right click on it, and copy the link address. Then I go to my database server and I just type wget and paste that link. And that gets me Apex. Now, you'll notice that traditionally on a Unix server, use a local source is the place where you put source code. I treat this download as if it were source code. And I, underneath user local source, so I put Oracle Apex and then the version number, and you know, I've got this stuff there. This is going to be the location where I install from, but it's just the source is the way I treat it. Unzip-q just means I don't get a ton of output when I unzip the file, so it's quiet. And once you go into the directory, when you do that unzip, inside of that 23.1 directory, I end up with an Apex directory. Inside of that directory, I just type. I get into the database as the sys user, and we do an @apexins, sysox temp I, and about 6 minutes or so later, and this depends obviously on the speed of your machine, could be faster, could be a little bit slower, but you're done. And you have installed the Apex component into your database.
Rich, we've got another question that's come in from Fernando Jimenez.
Yeah, about ORDS. We're going to talk about ORDS later. Yeah. So let's hold that question until the ORDS section. And if it's still outstanding, Fernando, then just ask me then. So the note about those Apex repositories table spaces, sometimes people will tell you, oh, you got to create your own Apex table space and maybe Apex document uploads table space. If you've got if you're building just kind of regular Apex applications, you can put the Apex repository into your sysox table space. Totally fine, not the end of the world. The second table space, the second sysox, That's the table space that APEX is going to use when you do document uploads. So if you're just building a regular APEX app and you're not building a document management or content management system where there's going to be lots of big document uploads, SysAux is probably fine. If you are going to be doing a ton of big document uploads, then it would be recommended to take that out of the SysAux table space and put it somewhere else. The APEX repository isn't really that big, and APEX applications themselves are also not really that big. So leaving them in SysAux is totally fine. One note about this is if you are using Oracle free tier on the cloud, you might want to create, well, actually you can't create your own table spaces if you're using the autonomous database stuff. So this stuff might go into the data table space or something. Although actually the autonomous database, Oracle maintains APEX for you. So let's just ignore that stuff. If you're using the database as a service on Oracle Cloud where you can create your own tables, spaces, and that type of stuff, it's optional to create your own table spaces, and definitely something that I tend to do a lot less than I used to way back in the past. So remember, this is what we had. These are all the schemas before APEX is installed. We just installed APEX. How did this change? We got 3 new schemas. We have the APEX followed by the version number of APEX, locked. We have the APEX public user, locked. And we have flows files, locked. Security hasn't changed. Nothing has changed. You have just added a new component to the database. So what components did you have before APEX was installed? These were the 12. Now we have this new component in the database. So, you know, a DBA that's afraid of this, of putting APEX into the database at this stage would be, I think, a little crazy, right? There's no reason not to have the APEX component inside of the database. How many public synonyms did we have before APEX was installed? 11,550. Now we have 476 additional public synonyms. So we got a bunch of public synonyms. And then what did the table spaces look like before APEX was installed? This was it. After it, about 350 megabytes or 340 used megabytes have been added. And physically, I got about 350 because I think stuff was growing at 10 megabytes a time with the auto extend. So nothing much has really happened to the database as far as the DBA is concerned. The database will now tell us things about APEX. And so there's this view called APEX release, and it actually just has 3 columns. And the patch applied a long time ago, I logged a bug against this because we've installed APEX and there is no patch. And I said, hey, patch applied. The comment on the column was wrong. It said the date that the patch was applied. And then the data type was wrong. And so I logged a bug against it. And the solution that the APEX team came up with was not to change it to the date the patch was applied, but instead to just update the comment and say, this is reserved for internal use during Oracle APEX upgrade, and you shouldn't look at it. So if we look at the second view, APEX patches, we can see that there's no rows selected and there are no patches applied to this APEX. So let's fix that. And for this presentation, I actually updated this on Monday because Monday, APEX patch version 5 was released by the APEX team. So unlike lots of Oracle patches where the patch number changes every single time there's a new patch, with APEX, you get one patch number for each version of APEX, And then the team updates the patch version, but the patch number remains the same. So before Monday, this was patch version 4, and actually before a week before that, I think it was 3. But they found a bug in 4 pretty quick and patched it to 5. That happened on Monday. So what you do, you need an Oracle support account to be able to go get this patch. And what I do is I click on the patch. That takes me into Oracle support. And one of the things I'm going to show you is most people click the download in Oracle support for the patch set, and then they just click the link, this link here, to download the zip file. But you can actually use wget to actually pull the file directly to your database server. I'm going to show you guys how to do that. So you click wget. This gives you download.sh. You take the contents of that download.sh file and copy them into a wget.sh file on your database server. And you can see 23.1, right? So user local source, Oracle APEX 23.1. I'm just going to put the patch in the same directory as the APEX download. Make it executable and then run it. Now, an interesting thing about this wget.sh script, on Windows, it'll always present you with a username and then the password. On Unix, about 95% of the time, you put in your username, and this is your username for oracle.com. You press enter, and the cursor just hangs there. But what it's really asking you for is to type your password in and then hit enter again. So just unique little idiosyncrasy of these scripts that Oracle put together. They don't seem to work exactly the way they should. When you do that, the download happens, you get the patch file, you unzip it and go into the patch directory, right? So when you unzip it, you get a directory that is the name of the patch or the number of the patch, and then start up SQL Plus. I did SQL Plus this time instead of SQL CL, just because the timing command only works in SQL Plus. They haven't updated the patches to work with SQL CL and have the correct timing. Doesn't matter. If you do this in SQL CL, you just don't get this message at the end. You get a message about like timing isn't supported. And that just, you can totally ignore that. But effectively, or in actuality, the only thing you're going to do is change into the directory and run cat patch. 8 seconds later or so, you're done. And now the database, what does it tell us about APEX? So this time this applied is true, but remember, this is used for internal usage during patching, and it doesn't mean anything. The version number of APEX is now up. It's 23.1.5 instead of 23.1.0. APEX patches tells us that there is a patch that has been applied, and the registry now has updated the version and the version full columns to show that APEX is patched. The cool thing is this: what you have done as a database administrator by running effectively 2 commands inside of the database is you have delivered a massive, massive amount of value to all the database developers in your organization. So if we just stop here, you have still done something incredibly amazing. These API sets that are available, there are some absolutely amazing things here. The APEX string util or APEX string, I guarantee you there are Oracle built and maintained procedures inside of these packages that your developers are hand coding themselves. And almost definitely they're making a mistake here and there, because there's lots of little idiosyncrasies to think about with, you know, like NLS support and all the different little things that can happen when you're writing code. And this code is written, debugged, maintained by the Oracle development team, and it is awesome. There's an APEX mail package, so if you've got some custom code sending emails, APEX mail is incredibly awesome. At the Insum team, we actually wrote a wrapper around APEX mail that we call Insum mail that adds even more value to this type of stuff. APEX debug, a whole debugging system built into the database. The tables are already created. You can use this API to instrument all of your code, all of your PL SQL code, and put the messages directly into the database. There's a data parser API that does amazing things. There's so much incredible value that is in this API stuff that is absolutely amazing. And every DBA who says, no, I'm not going to install APEX, you are denying your developers access to this API set. And here's the thing. There were no security changes. We have no new unlock schemas. We do have new APIs, but it's nothing that, you know, 100 or so brilliant developers could have done on their own time in a few decades. So if you're going to deny your database developers access to the APEX component of the database because, quote unquote, you don't understand it or it's not secure, I'm going to say you're falling down on your job as a DBA. And that, my friends, is the end of what I consider the bare minimum DBA actions. Install and patch the APEX component inside of the database. So now let's, and you can stop here, still delivered incredible value. I want to go to the next step now, which is to allow developers and applications to reach out of the database to other resources. This is optional, and this is where the type of thing where the security is going to change, which is one of the reasons why I put together the installation in this way, so that DBAs and teams could make decisions as they were going along of how much they wanted to enable. So to me, this is the next step. I'm in the database. I want to reach out to a REST service or a web service that's somewhere on the internet. So what we're going to do is we're going to do that. We're going to let database developers and applications reach web services. So security is about to change. Database has these UTL, HTTP packages. The APEX team has taken those packages and extended them with extra value if you as a DBA enable that value. So right now, those extra value packages don't work. So one of those packages, APEX Web Service, and it has a procedure called make REST request. And if you pass in a URL and then a REST method of get, you should be able to get the content of Google from that query. But you'll notice that the database says no. Network access has been denied by the access control list. So let's fix it. This little code snippet, this anonymous PL SQL block, this is directly from the APEX installation application or documentation. And this now says that schemas within the database can run that query and make connections. You still have to have, for those schemas, they still have to have the 5 facts, right? They need the host, the port, the service name, and the username and password to connect into the database. And when they do this, they can now reach non-TLS protected URLs. So if I now try to run this query, select APEX Web Service, make REST requests, Google with a get, I get it. I get the content from Google. I have pulled that in. The operative thing here, though, is the HTTP in this GET request, right? So this is a non-TLS or so lots of times people call TLS SSL, but that actually ended in the 1990s. So we use TLS now to get stuff. So if I try to add the S, and you should always add the S. When I try to do that, this doesn't work anymore. If I add the S to that google.com to get HTTPS, I get an error, and the error is certificate validation failure. If your developers need to reach TLS protected URLs, and really your developers should only be reaching TLS protected URLs, you could quasi make the argument that like if it was internal only and was HTTP, that would be fine. But I always use TLS to make sure that my developers are reaching secure things. So the thing you need is a TLS wallet. Some people still call it an SSL wallet, but that's exactly like some people still call a car a horseless carriage. If somebody did it, you would look at them strange. You should necessarily look at everybody who says SSL wallet with as much strangeness as somebody who said horseless carriage. But really, this change happened in the 1990s. We don't use SSL to reach websites anymore. We use TLS. So since I'm pedantic, I name it a TLS wallet. Now, what's a TLS wallet? So these Oracle wallets are a directory. The name of the wallet is the name of the directory that holds potentially one or two or both of these files. The eWallet.p12 file. In this case, in a TLS wallet, it's going to contain a list of trusted certificates. And then optionally, there's a cwallet.sso file. This file means that you can read this wallet without supplying the password. You can't update it. You can't delete trusted search. You can't add new ones. You can't do that type of stuff without the password. But if you just need to read it, and the database is going to need to read it, the cwallet.sso has the encrypted password that enables you to read the wallet. With other types of wallets, different things can be in them, and you really, really need to never mix your wallets. So here's just a tiny little primer of the main types of wallets that Oracle provides. Every Oracle database is going to have an XDB wallet. It's shipped with the database. And it's used by Oracle XMLDB, which is in the old days how we got WebDB and HTMLDB to have a listener that let you get into the database to run PL SQL code in the database, the old HTTP stuff. In general, it's not really used much these days. A SEPS wallet allows you to use bequeath connections. So when we're a DBA, we could type SQL + as sysdba without supplying a username, without supplying a password, and we get in. You can do that same thing for other users using a SEPS wallet. And what will happen is you don't have to type the username and the password. You just use a TNS alias that points to a reference in the SEPS wallet and a specific syntax, and you can get into the database as a particular user. I do this all the time for my RMAN catalog connections. So I don't have to save the password to the database and the password to the RMAN repository in a script somewhere. Instead, I just set up a SEPS wallet and I connect as sys or system to the local database and to the RMAN repository using the SEPS connection. Don't have to put in the password. You can also have a transparent data encryption wallet. I name mine TDE_wallet, and that's where I put stuff. but there's a new database parameter called wallet root. If you set the wallet root parameter, then Oracle will create a directory in the directory that you set that wallet root parameter of TDE, and they'll put your transparent data encryption wallet in it. Back when I was first doing this, the Oracle documentation wasn't terribly clear, and I had a transparent data encryption wallet, and I put my trusted certificates into the TDE wallet. Everything worked great until the database rebooted, and transparent data encryption didn't like having the trusted certificates in the same wallet, and I couldn't read any of my encrypted data anymore. So let's just say that was a long day with Oracle support to figure out why that didn't work. Eventually we got it to work, but we had to take the trusted certs out of the TDE wallet and put them into a different wallet. And then this TLS wallet is the thing that should be used for accessing web services or URLs that are protected by TLS. So let's make that TLS wallet. I install the locate command on all my servers. I locate the XDB wallet. Where is it? It's in the Oracle base admin directory, then the database name, and there's that XDB wallet. I always make my wallets next to the shipped out of the box XDB wallet, right? I then CD into this wallet directory, and I run that simple command, or a PKI wallet create dash wallet dot, because I'm in this directory, so it'll make it in that directory. And then I specify auto login. Auto login is the thing that's going to create the cwallet.sso file. You can add an underscore only, and then this wallet, that cwallet.sso file, that encrypted password, will literally only work on this particular server, and you can never copy it anywhere else and still have it continue to work. Which, if you're doing your TDE wallet, might be a great idea. For your TLS wallet that's just going to contain trusted root certificates, I wouldn't ever add the underscore only to that auto login. So you type in the wallet password, confirm it, and you're done. You now have a wallet. The wallet name is TLS wallet, and the two files that are in it are cwallet.sso and ewallet.p12. What's in the wallet? Nothing. The line that says requested certificates really should say certificate signing requests, because that's what those are. User certificates would be signed, the signed version of the certificate signing request. Once you get a user certificate back, that would go in the user certificates section. The trusted certificates, that's where we're going to put stuff. This is empty. And we didn't need to supply a password to read the wallet because we had that cwallet.sso file. So let's tell APEX where that wallet is. And there's actually two ways to do it. One is you just run this APEX instance admin set parameters, say wallet path, and tell the APEX where the wallet is. You got to do a commit if you're trying to do stuff in the same session. With this, it won't work until you do a commit, so do a commit. Or you could log into the APEX admin UI and set this wallet path, but we haven't set up the APEX admin UI yet. So at this stage of the game, I'm going to run that procedure. Now, the next step is to get the trusted root certificate from the resource that you were trying to reach. Since we were trying to reach Google, I'm just going to go to Google. And depending on your browser, these steps might be slightly different, but all the steps are the things that you could do. You could just Google what is the trusted certificate for google.com, and potentially you would get an answer back and you could just go directly download it. But if you can reach the place that you're trying to get to using a browser, this is one of the ways that you can do it. So you click the connection is secure. That gives you a little pop-up. There's certificate is valid. Click that. Go over to the details and you'll see the certificate chain. We see GTS root R1, CTSCA1C3, and then star.google.com. So star.google.com is the leaf certificate, GTSCA1C3 is the intermediate, but that GTS root R1, that is the root certificate. So you go over to the details, you select that, and then you click the export button on the bottom. When you export it, you want the base 64 encoded ASCII version of it. When you do this file stuff, save as type, there's a choice to get a binary version of it. You don't want that. You want the ASCII encoded version of this certificate. It looks like this. So when you download it and you look at the file, it's going to look like this. There will be a begin certificate, an end certificate, and a whole bunch of characters. We're going to put that content into a file on our database server. And it literally doesn't matter what that file is named. It could be named Bob. It doesn't matter. I tend to name them sort of what they are. The .crt extension, totally optional, could be anything. Now let's add it into the wallet. We do that with the Aura PKO wallet add -wallet dot, because I'm in the directory where my wallet lives. -trusted cert, because we're going to put it in the trusted cert section, and then -cert in the name of the file that contains those characters that we got from our browser. You will be required to supply the Oracle password. You could add it on the command line, but then it gets saved in your history and your password is there. Not that it really matters for this particular wallet, because remember, this just has a bunch of public root certificates in it. And this is a very important thing, that it's the root certificate. Over the years on these TLS wallets, Oracle has changed what needs to be in the wallet to be able to access a resource from the database. It is currently only the root certificate needs to be put in there. Once that's in there, it works. At different points in the past, you have had to do things like put the leaf certificate in, or put the root and intermediate certificate in. You don't want to do that today. Just the root certificate is what you need. We look inside the wallet. Again, we don't need the password because we have that cwallet.sso. And what do we see? There's the Google root certificate. Now, if I try to run my query using HTTPS, what do I see? I see the content. Now, I've got a little note in here. You might want to just create a new session when you're doing testing. If you use the same session that you had open before and you set the APEX instance wallet path in a different session, it might not work, right? In this APEX REST request, you can set the wallet location directly in here when you do this. I don't do that. Just create a new session. So if you did all the steps and it doesn't seem to work, just create a new session. From this point forward, once we have the root certificate in the wallet, anytime anybody wants to get to google.com, it's just going to work. If the place that you are going to doesn't have an officially signed certificate, and they used a self-signed certificate, a self-signed certificate doesn't have an intermediate certificate and a root certificate associated with it. It's just effectively the leaf and the root all at the same time. Add that directly in, and you will be now able to access that resource with the self-signed certificate directly in the wallet. And there are some things you can do here. That easy button from earlier, if you look at it, it basically says append a host access control entry, and the host is any host, and the permission is connect. And the principle is because the APEX Web Service make REST request procedure in the package is owned by this APEX user. This is the thing that lets us get out there. And effectively, this says you can go to anywhere. You can try to get to anywhere. Now, remember, you're only going to get to be able to get to places that have the trusted root certificate in the wallet. But this lets you get anywhere. And some DBAs are going to say, well, no. I want much greater granularity on this. So we could be extremely specific when we generate this host access control entry. We could say, oh, you could go to Google and you could only go on port 443, right? So if they tried to go to any other website that was signed by that same trusted cert, it wouldn't work if this was the access control entry that you that they put in. And if they go this route, then for every single service, they're going to have to choose what things they enable, what the host name is, what the port is, the upper port, the lower port, and then these are the different types of things that you can pass into the privilege list. Can you do connect? That means you can effectively do everything. HTTP is HTTP only. SMTP resolve lets you type in the name instead of an IP address. And then there's some stuff to set up if you're using proxies and other stuff, right? So this can be managed with extreme granularity if you want to go through that overhead. Personally, I and my customers, we almost never do. We just do the generic thing, and then we control the access list by the trusted certificates that are in the wallet. Although that just means every trusted website that is signed by that root certificate is someplace that you could go to.
Rich, we have a question from Matt McGee.
Okay. In that APEX, do you know if you configure multiple wallets with a specific separator? So no, Matt. A wallet is one and only one wallet, because the wallet is the eWallet.p12 file in the case of this type of wallet, a TLS wallet. That eWallet.p12 file, that's the contents. The directory is the name of the wallet. You could absolutely, if you wanted to, set up a whole bunch of different wallets and have different trusted certs in it. And then in that APEX Web Service make REST request, you could pass in an extra argument of use this wallet this time, use the other wallet this time, etc. APEX itself is set up to just have one and only one APEX wallet field path. That becomes quote unquote the default. If you don't specify it, I'm going to use this one. You could create extra wallets and then specify them. And then you could actually leave the default blank, right? So in general, it's much easier to just have one wallet and just put all the trusted certificates into it. In practice, though, if you need to provide more granular security, you can definitely do that. And you would do that by creating multiple wallets and then forcing the developers to choose their particular wallet. Or potentially what you could do is you could put a wrapper around the APEX Web Service make REST request for each of the individual schemas, and then not let them call that directly. Put a wrapper, and that wrapper just says, oh, I'm always going to use this wallet path. And so the developers get to call, my schema name, my package dot make REST request. The API set would be the same. You would just hard code in their particular wallet. In that APEX wallet, okay. Yes. All right. This certificate thing is garbage, right? So it does potentially theoretically make things more secure, but is just an incredible pain in the butt. If you really wanted to have very granular security, what you really should do is use the access control entries inside of the database to restrict exactly where somebody could go. That's the right thing. This wallet thing of having different certificates in it, totally, absolutely wrong. It should never work this way. Imagine if the internet worked this way. Oh, I just signed up for an account at Chase. Oh, so to access Chase, I have to go to my browser, find the Chase website, find the root certificate, put it into my browser so that my browser will then recognize Chase as a legitimate website. That would be like redunculous. The internet would never work. What should happen is Oracle should say, give us an automated way that says, hey, let's build a wallet, let's put all the known good root certificates in it, and let's let a DBA optionally use that one if they want, right? And there should be a job that just refreshes the good known certificates and that type of stuff. This should work just like your browser does. Now, Danny put together a wallet creator. Adrian also put together a different wallet creator that kind of goes out and grabs all the root certs and puts them into a wallet. But Oracle should just provide an automated way to do this. I've actually talked to Gerald Benzel on the database product management team, and they're working on this, and I've communicated all of this to them. So it could get better at some point in the future. But in 23C, there's going to be something to do where you can use the OS's default certificate store, but it's not going to work with the UTL HTTP stuff yet. So they're aware of the problem, and they're going to try to make it better. I think we should all pile on and ask them to do it as soon as possible. So we've now wrapped up the section of my application developers and database developers now have the ability to reach outside of the database to go get content from other applications as long as it's accessible through a REST service or a web service. Next step, we're going to take the final step and enable people to go into the database through ORDS. We're also going to let them build REST services, and we're also going to enable database actions. Again, this section is optional. You don't have to do it if your team doesn't want to do it, but it's incredibly useful. So what is ORDS? It's an application that Oracle provides. It's free, right? It gives us 3 different tool sets. It enables access to Oracle Application Express, that component that we put into the database, through a browser-based web development environment. It enables also database actions, which the tool says database actions, the database says database actions. If you talk to Jeff Smith, he's going to say, oh, no, it's SQL Developer Web. And I'm like, but dude, the documentation doesn't say that. The tool doesn't say that. So he wants it all to still be SQL Developer Web, but apparently the documentation people and the app people don't agree with them. So if you hear SQL Developer Web, it is database actions. If you hear database actions, it is SQL Developer Web. And then also REST-enabled services. So those are the 3 things that ORDS enables, 3 applications that ORDS enables. ORDS itself includes an embedded web server. And this is an important change, and this is a change from ORDS. Originally, ORDS didn't have an embedded web server, and you had to deploy ORDS to a web server. People were using Tomcat or Glassfish, or hopefully nobody from Oracle ever sees this. Heaven help you, Oracle WebLogic. But you don't have to do that anymore. This embedded web server, it's named Jetty, it's built in and it is certified for production environments. apex.oracle.com uses ORDS standalone, including this Jetty, to run their stuff. And I guarantee you their stuff, apex.oracle.com, is bigger than whatever it is that you're doing, probably. So where do we put this? And technically, it really doesn't matter. ORDS is actually pretty darn small. It's a small Java application, and it routes you to the database server to resolve and do things inside of the database. And so it's almost just like a little forwarding utility. It's very small. There are thousands of deployments where people put ORDS directly on the database server. Run it either as the root user on the database server or the Oracle user. There are thousands of deployments where people have deployed it to Tomcat or WebLogic or something like that, right? And then there's thousands of people that are just using it on a web server instead of the database server, or on an application server. It doesn't really matter all that much where you put ORDS. Many people like to put them on a web server or an application server and set up an ORDS server. But I can tell you that we've got plenty of people who just put ORDS on the database server. Doesn't add enough overhead to make a difference. Now, if you're doing something where you're building an APEX application that's going to go out to the internet, then I would probably take ORDS off my database server and actually put it on a web server or application server, just to potentially have some increased security type of stuff. But when you set up ORDS, the users are going to access ORDS through a port. And the default port, I think, is wrong. And I think the only port that the users should ever access any of this stuff through is port 443. I'm going to show you how to set up ORDS using port 443, both in a regular standalone mode, and then we'll see later in the bonus section that is going to be at the end, how to use firewall forwarding to do this. And the reason is this. All browsers these days mark any site that is served up on port 80 as insecure. So you shouldn't use it. You should use it TLS. 443 is the default TLS port, the HTTPS port. That's the port you should use. A browser would go to it, it's not going to generate a warning, and it's going to look pretty. You can set the port number to be like, lots of times you'll see stuff like 8080, right? The problem with that is all the users have to put that port number into their URL, and it looks ugly. So to me, we should always set up our applications so that they kind of work the way the internet works, right? When I go to chase.com, I don't have to put in a port number to access it because they serve up their content on port 443. You should do the same thing. This is big now because security is about to really change. When we install the APEX component, no security changes. Only locked accounts inside of the database and now a new component in the database. When we enabled access from the database to out of the database, security changed a little bit. Security is going to change a lot. We're now going to let people get into our database using a new application that previously wasn't enabled. We're going to create and create new schemas, unlock existing schemas to get this stuff to work. All of these schemas are purely for middleware connection pools. The passwords are for DBAs. We're not handing out any of this type of stuff. Ultimately, we're still setting up the same exact things that somebody would need to connect to our database if they were using SQL Developer, the 5 facts, right? Host, port, service name, username, and password, right? All this is just another way to connect into the database. So if we're unlocking and creating new accounts, profiles matter. The default profile in the password, or the default password lifetime in the database for the default profile is 180 days. So oftentimes people will set up everything and then 180 days later, they're like, everything just stopped working and we didn't change a thing. Well, you didn't, but the database went in and expired the passwords for our connection pool accounts that we were using to get into the database, right? So do this, either alter the profile default, set the limit for the password lifetime to unlimited, or if you're really pedantic, you could leave the default profile alone. You could create a no expire profile and then assign it to the APEX and ORDS connection pool accounts. I will tell you, I really like just setting the default password lifetime to unlimited. Sometimes some security people don't want you to do that, but it just makes it easy. You do it once, you never think about it ever again. Whereas the no expire stuff, you have to remember every time you create an account where it's a service account and the password shouldn't expire, you got to go add it to the no, or give that user, that schema, the no expire profile. So first thing we do is we unlock the APEX public user. Now, the password that we set up here when we do this is actually never used by APEX. It's just when we unlock a password, unlock an account, you have to set a password, we're setting it. It doesn't get used. We actually connect as a different user and then proxy into this user later. So this doesn't get saved in any configuration files or anything like this. If you've been around for a long time and you had some earlier versions of APEX, there's this APEX REST config.sql script that the documentation talks about. You only need to run that if you're upgrading from APEX 5 or earlier, and in APEX 5 or earlier, you used the REST services capability that was directly inside of the APEX. And this APEX REST config.sql script sets up some extra accounts and migrates your code into the REST repository. So you don't need to do this unless you're in that particular situation. So let's get ORDS and let's make this work now. Now, when you go to either these URLs, right? Database, SQL Developer, Technologies, DB Actions, download, or more appropriately, that second link, OTN software, Java, ORDS, ORDS latest.zip. The link at the top is always to the ORDS latest version. I have found over the years that sometimes it can be a pain to find the most current version of ORDS. And so this ORDS latest.zip always gives you the most current version. If you can find the most current version, in this case, it's 23.2.3 that was released 23 days ago. You can just download it directly using that link. If you see this link though, this will give you this file. The advantage that this link has is when you download this, it gives you the version number right in it, and you don't have to run the ORDS command to figure out what the version is. And we'll see why that's important. So I'm going to use wget trick again. We copy the link address. I go to my application server and I get the ORDS. Notice where I am. I'm in my user local source, right? This place where I'm sticking my source files. I get this zip file. It's got all the nice version number information in the name because I use that second link. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the 3/4 directories that are important for ORDS to run. But I'm also going to recognize that I am going to maintain this ORDS, and I'm going to update it when there is a new version of ORDS, right? Yes, so Juno asked a compatibility matrix that shows which APEX version works with which ORDS version. Yes, there is. It's an Oracle support. And you can, on the download ORDS pages, if for some reason you're on an old version of APEX, first, upgrade your APEX. That's what you should do. But if you're on an old version of APEX and the current version of ORDS doesn't support it, you can get the previous versions of ORDS by navigating through the previous versions. So the place that you find that matrix is you go to support.oracle.com, log in with your support account, and there's a certifications tab, and ORDS is one of the things, and APEX is one of the things, and it will tell you which version of ORDS is supported with which versions of APEX. So these ORDS directories, I see people mix all these directories together. So remember, we had our download to the source directory location, right? We have a runtime directory, a configuration directory, and then a document directory that has two pieces, a document root and the APEX images. So potentially there's like 5 different places here. I have seen people take all 5 places and put them in one spot and then start to get very confused about what is where. So for me, I've been using Linux since like before Linux was Linux, like the director of Linux International married my first wife and I by reading the vows off of a Palm Pilot that was running Linux. And Linus Torvalds and I and he have sat down in a room and decided what the mascot for Linux was going to be way back in the day. And to me, on a Linux server, opt is the place where we install optional software. So I make opt ords and then the version number as my runtime directory. The configuration directory on a Linux server, Etsy, is where we put our configuration files. So Etsy ords and the version number. And then the traditional spot for static resources to be served up by a web server or application server is var www HTML. The APEX images are traditionally in an I directory. So I make var www HTML I as a location where I'm going to put those images. You can put these anywhere, and some people do. But I like to have my Linux server work exactly the way all the other Linux servers in the world work out there. And heaven help you if you're on Windows, but using Windows, I would probably just create 3 directories like ORDS runtime, ORDS configuration, and ORDS document root. And that way it'd be pretty clear what they are. So when you serve up an APEX web page, there are static images like the Oracle logo that comes from Oracle, right? So you've got to make a choice on where you want those static images to come from. And there's 2 choices. One is use the Oracle Content Delivery Network. And to me, that's the better choice. But there are some people who say, I don't want to use something on the internet. I want everything on my local machine. And in that case, you can deploy and patch the APEX static images on your application server. I'm going to show you how to do both. So to use the Content Delivery Network, and I said this is the preferred way, we go to our download location where we downloaded Oracle APEX. We extracted it. That created an APEX directory. Underneath that directory is utilities. You log into the database, you run this reset image prefix. It says, what is the image prefix? You put in the location that you got when you went to the APEX download page. In the patch section, there was what CDN should be you be using for this particular version. And I'm noticing I forgot to update this slide. So that should be a 5 right there. So I'm gonna fix it. So this is you put in that URL and then it sets it. And now you're done. Now Oracle maintains all the static images for you and you don't have to do anything. You can still put stuff into the document root and reference it from your APEX site, or actually, you can put anything there and it'll just work. Or you could do this: deploy and patch the APEX static images manually. Now, this copy, we could have done a move, right? And I could have taken the images out of the download location, but personally, I like to do a copy so that my download has everything the way it was shipped from Oracle. So we do a recursive copy, get everything from the APEX images in my download location, and I put it into var www.htmli. And that gives me all of my images. To patch the images up to the version in the patch number, the patched number in the download location also has an images directory, and I do this. Now you'll notice I'm running all of this as the root user currently. We're going to see that you could do a different user later. Almost all servers have aliased copy to copy-i for the root user. If you put a slash in front of your CP, you're not going to get asked for every single file. That said, there's only usually about 10 or 12 files that get patched, so it's not that big of a deal. But if you do that, this command just runs, and now your images are patched. So, next step, let's create that ORDS runtime. So, from my download location, I extract the zip file. And that extraction is, I have now created an ORDS runtime. You can see that there's various directories here. This ords.war file, in the past, we used to possibly rename this to do some things. I'm going to show you we don't need to do that anymore. So, little details here. If I look at the bin directory, there's 2 files, the ORDS executable and the Windows executable. This is now the command that we run. We used to have to run Java commands and pass in this ords.war file as an argument. We don't have to do that anymore. The other directory that has some possibly interesting things in it is the scripts directory. This here, the ORDS installer privileges, if the DBA won't give the ORDS installer the sys password to set up the accounts, and instead they want to give them a different user, but they also don't want that user to have DBA privs, what you could do is create a user and then run, the DBA creates the user, and then they run this script to give that user the ability to set up ORDS. And once the ORDS installation is done, they could then remove that user. So if you're in the situation where, the system admin and the DBA don't get along, and the system admin or the DBA doesn't want to type in the password remotely or give a password, this is how you get around that. And then this migrate stuff, that's just if you have older versions, there's some migration types of things that you could do with those. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into the bin directory from our runtime directory, and we're going to run ORDS. We're going to pass in an argument, config. Where is the configuration directory? there it is, with a command called install. Now you can do this setting up like a file and pass in the file, but it's actually pretty simple to walk through interactively. And this is what I usually do, because the reality is we do this maybe 3 or 4 times a year, depending on how often the ORDS is updated. So first choice 2, create or update a pool and install/upgrade ORDS in the database. Why they didn't make this the default choice number 1, I do not know. But what are you going to do? We're going to use a basic connection, but you could use a TNS if you have it, or a custom database URL. Basic is typically the way to go. You put in the 5 facts: the name of the database server, the host, the port, the name, the service name of the database, and then the username and password. So I'm using sys here. It automatically detects that, says sys is sysdba, and then I have to put in the password. And that gets me into the database. I next choose the table spaces that I'm going to use. So ORDS metadata and ORDS public user, these are 2 new users that we're going to get inside of the database. I put them in sysaux and temp. And again, the ORDS metadata, the ORDS public user basically has nothing, no objects, barely any. I don't think any actually. It's just used to connect into the database and then do a proxy connection as the APEX public user. Remember that account that we unlocked earlier. So sysaux and temp are fine for those. I always enable all features, database actions, because you get to choose how the extra features are going to work after, or if they're going to work or not. Are we going to run ORDS in standalone mode? You bet. And then we're always going to do HTTPS, and I always change the HTTPS to 443. I can do that in this case because I'm running as root. I'm going to show you later how to do this if you don't want the ORDS process to run as the root user. So here, I am just using self-signed certificates that get automatically generated because I didn't want to go out and pay to register applicationserver.insum.ca. So, however, I think you should always use signed SSL certificates, even if it's an internal website. If you use self-signed certs running on port 443, you can go through this tricky process where you take the cert and load it into a trusted wallet kind of in your browser so that you don't get the warnings. But, you know, just pay the few bucks, or you can do something where you can get a certificate signed by a free company that will sign certificates. The trick there is you have to have a machine on the internet that it can access to set that. So I just usually pay the money, get a signed certificate. And if I had chosen choice 2, it would have asked me for the SSL certificate and the SSL certificate private key. In this case, I'm just using self-sign to get through this. Put in the host name that I want the users to type in to get to this, and the APEX static images location. Lots and lots and lots and lots of things come out. And eventually, you'll see something that says Oracle REST Data Services, Java Info, Java Hotspot, something like this, right? And we can see that we have a mapped local pools from this directory to this place, ORDS, right? And it's valid. And so what happened when we ran that configure and or that install command is this. In our configuration directory, we got a bunch of files. We've got a pool.xml. If you look at that, that has the port service name, the proxy username. So ORDS public user is actually the user that we connect as to get ORDS to work. And then we proxy over to the APEX public user to make APEX work. We also get this cwallet.sso file in a wallet directory. Notice we don't have an ewallet.p12. We just have this cwallet.sso. What is in this file? It is the unknown encrypted password for the ORDS public user. Remember, the install didn't ask us, hey, what's the password for ORDS public user? Because it doesn't need it, because the installer itself created the user and created some randomized password that is stored in this encrypted wallet. In the global, we have setting.xml. We're going to look at this file later. And then if you ever run ORDS in standalone mode, you end up with a standalone directory, 2 files in there right now, self-signed key and self-signed PAM. If you run the standalone and you supply your own certificates, I would put the key and the certificate, the signed certificate, I would put them in the normal Unix places rather than in this standalone directory. But you could certainly put them here, doesn't matter. In the settings.xml, we see some stuff, right? So if the database's API is enabled, that's because we chose choice 1. We have this standalone context path is /ords, no slash on the end, /ords. This means that when I go to my website, applicationserver.insum.ca, and go to /ords, I'm going to have access to the applications that ORDS is serving up. We got this doc root. Now notice I say both of these are bad. We're going to fix them later. We've got our port. We've got this static context path. That's where your image is. This is how images are accessed on the URL. So applicationserver.insum.ca/i/insumlogo.jpg would serve up the Insum logo as long as it was in that I directory. The standalone static path is where are the files physically located. In the pool.xml, we see the basic stuff here. Now, this thing here, this PL/SQL gateway mode. So I have noticed lately that if you repeat these steps with, say, version 23.2.4, for example, sometimes the next version, this PL/SQL gateway mode proxy gets dropped out. So if you're doing a fresh install into a database where ORDS has never been installed, it's always there. If you upgrade by following these exact same steps, but changing the directories for the runtime and the configuration, sometimes this gets left out. I've logged it as a bug. You can see it's internal bug. Hopefully it'll be fixed if it's not already. We can get there. I go to applicationserver.insum.ca/ords/apexadmin. Hey, look, there's my Apex administration services. So I've set up access to this application now. In order to log into that page, I need to create an Apex admin user and a password. Now, this is an Apex account, not a database schema account. I go into my Apex directory in my download location. I log in, I run Apex password or Apex change password. And now I can create the administrator username, set the email, and set the password. Now that I have those, I can log in. Admin, put in the password I used, and lo and behold, I have Apex 23.1.5, and I can start creating workspaces and doing the stuff that you do with Apex. So a note about those URLs. If you're going to Apex, your server name.com or whatever it is, .ca in some case, /ords/ and then you see this F?P, that there's a function called P, or there's a function called F that takes a parameter. P is 200. This is like an app ID or something like that. Apex itself is now switching to pretty URLs, what you're going to see there is the ords and then this /r. I asked them what the /r stand for. I think they said in their mind it was rest. But then you could have these pretty URLs, so you can create pages, and if you assign a pretty URL, you get this type of URL. The Oracle Database Actions, here I have formerly SQL Developer Web. Jeff Smith might disagree and say it's still SQL Developer Web, but ords/SQL Developer. And if I REST enable something and created this type of access path for a REST service, this is how I would get to it. The guy who invented the internet, who was knighted by the Queen, is a guy named Tim Berners-Lee. So he invented, you know, the World Wide Web and how web pages link to each other and all of that type of stuff. He wrote an article in 1998. Now, it's very possible there are people attending right now or who will listen to this in the future who were not even born in 1998. But he wrote an article about what makes a cool URL. And literally as nothing has changed since then. And you know, you're definitely welcome to go read this. Remember, all the links and all the code is in that GitHub repository. So just go to the GitHub repository and you can have it. And those URLs are bad according to Sir Tim, right? Because this here is the technology used to serve this resource here. And he explains why this is bad and why you really shouldn't do it, right? A URL should say, this is how I get to something. It shouldn't say, oh, and by the way, this is the technology used to serve the thing that you're getting access to. So over the years, I've renamed my ords to various different things. For a while, web apps is what I was using, but of course it's web because you're using a browser to get there. And then I took off the apps because really you're going to a particular application. And so now app is the thing that I use. So I fix those URLs. I say, oh, hey, I'm going to an application. What is the application? It's whatever served up on this page, or it's the app that is here, or it's the application that is SQL Developer. To me, this is something that is clear, easy, makes sense, and technically it doesn't expose the technology that's used to serve up the page. It says what it is that you are going to. You're going to an app. So what we do is when we started up ORDS standalone, it was just running interactively on our Unix server. I do Control-C, it kills the running process. This was the old version of my settings.xml. I go and update it, and here's the things that I changed. I changed the context path and the document root, because both of those were wrong. And then I also changed this. Now, in the version I did at Kscope, I actually had 12s here, but when the ORDS team upgraded stuff to, and look at that, that says 2310. That should be 2323. I'll fix those after. But anyway, in 2323, that version of ORDS, they changed the minimum values for the max limit, and this is just the size of our connection pool, where it generates a warning if you're at 20 or below. So I don't like warnings. I wanted my warning to go away. I just set 21. The reason I do my min, initial, and max as the same is because my database server can handle 21 sessions trivially, right? It's not a big issue. If you set your min and initial small and your max large, what happens is when we run out of sessions, we pay the overhead of starting up a new session on the database server. So our connection pool from our application server over to our database server, we get that new connection. We pay that overhead of starting everything up on the database server. For internal websites where there's a few hundred or maybe a few thousand users, these settings are absolutely fine. If you do have a situation like some of my customers have situations where they have student registration systems, and at the beginning of a semester, there's this huge influx of people. You need to size this appropriately for your database server and for the traffic patterns that you have. I would strongly suggest setting all of these values to the same initially, unless you have a situation where you definitely need to scale up the servers because you have this big load coming at like 1 or 2 days, and then everything goes back down later. If you set these at different sizes, the database and the connection pool setting stuff in ORDS will eventually kill the extra sessions that are sitting there idle. But for me, I set all three the same, and now I don't have to pay the overhead when everything starts up on my database server. So we went in and had, we configured in etc.ords and opt.ords a 23.2.3 directory that has our runtime and our configuration. So what I do is I link those, doing it using a soft link, as the latest. And you're going to see later in our bonus section why I do that. At some point in the future, I'm going to unlink the latest, and I'm going to install 23.2.4, assuming the ORDS team releases it, and I'm going to do that in both places. And by using this latest, I can set up my commands to run ORDS to just use the latest, and everything will always point to the latest directory. So remember, we killed ORDS so that we could reset some things. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to run the simple mode of starting up ORDS. I'm going to do a no hup, so if my connection to my server dies, it'll just run in the background. So no hup is no hang up. It means if this session to the database or to the application server dies, the Unix session, this command will still run. Opt.ords latest bin ords, that's the name of the command we run. I pass in the configuration directory, which is now etc.ords latest, and I say serve, and then I put all the log output into a file. If I want to see what's going on with ORDS, I just tail that file, and lo and behold, hey, there it shows me ORDS is running. And now, instead of having /ords/APEX admin, I can get there using /app APEX admin. So we are now finished. Developers can use APEX to build and deploy applications and REST services. But there's more that we can do. Let's take a look at where we are now, though. So what schemas do we have after APEX and ORDS? So I'm not going to show the whole list of before and after. Here's what's changed since we did ORDS, right? So here's the new accounts that are locked. We have the APEX and the flows files. Those were from before. We now have 3 new unlocked schemas. APEX public user was there before, but it was locked. We now have this ORDS public user and ORDS metadata. And we can see that those 3 things are now open. So these are all the new users since we started this process and the status of their accounts. What components do we have? So this was before, we had these 12. Now we still only have 13. APEX is a component of the database. ORDS isn't a component. Now, between you and me, I really think ORDS should be a component, because the schemas are Oracle maintained schemas, or they should be, and they're not. And it should be just a real component in the database. Ultimately, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. I just think it should be. How many public synonyms did we have before? 11,550. Now we have 12,086. So we got a bunch of public synonyms. And table spaces, you know what? It went up tiny, right? Remember, I think we were at 350. I think we got 5 megs of new used space when we installed ORDS. And so what we can do now is we can enable database actions or SQL Developer Web. And remember, if I go to my application server, app SQL Developer, and see, notice how it says not secure? It says not secure because they use self-signed certs. We get a login, and this is just like a SQL Developer login. It gives you access into the database. In this case, ORDS has 3 of the 5 facts: the host name, the port, and the service name that we're connecting to. And now we just need to supply the username and the password. But you can't just type in any username and password that's in the database and have this work. You have to take an action inside of the database first to make this work. So I'm going to create schemas, and this is an interesting thing on this. So I'm going to create 2 different schemas: Rich, identified by Rich, and Bob, identified by Bob. I'm going to grant DBA to Rich and create session to Bob. And then what I'm going to do is enable the schema. So there's an ORDS admin package, enable schema. And in this case, I'm just going to pass in the schema name, Rich, and I'm done. In this case, I'm going to pass in Bob, but I'm going to also pass in an extra argument, the URL mapping pattern, set to cool guy. The reason you would do the second instead of the first is when Rich accesses SQL Developer Web or Oracle Database Actions, literally it's going to be server name /app/Rich. And one might say, oh, look, in the URL, we have the schema name, and that's not secure. So it's optional. You can specify this. And if you do, this changes the URL, and we'll see how that works. So the database tells us about our REST schemas. There's ORDS schemas and ORDS URL mappings. I join them together. And what do I see? Rich is enabled. The pattern is Rich. And so this is kind of important. I passed in lowercase schema name. In URLs, we traditionally have lower cases in our URLs, and that's the pattern that gets passed in. And then Bob is cool guy. So now we go here. I go to app SQL Developer. That's the name of the app that this server is serving up. With Rich, I just put in Rich and Rich, click sign in, and it's going to work. This little advanced thing, advanced here, I put in cool guy. That's my URL mapping pattern, and Bob, and that gets me in. And I think, no, I didn't do it. So when Rich logs in using this, it's going to be application server /app/rich/_SDW. Whereas with Bob, it's going to be app/coolguy/SDW. So, and you can see how the sign-in URL, if we wanted to give a direct link to Bob, we would say, hey, Bob, use this URL. And you'll get in there and notice that it's cool guy instead of Bob. So we haven't exposed the schema name on the URL. Once you're in there, and in this case, I'm logged in as Rich, so I have DBA privs, so I get to see and do lots of cool things. There are really, really awesome things in Oracle Database Actions or SQL Developer Web. It's a very, very cool tool. It's got development capabilities. There's REST capabilities. You can do SQL. You can do data loading with SQL. There's a little data modeler-ish type of thing in there. You can administer your database users, and there's a real-time SQL monitor. Now, the one thing about this monitoring is if Bob went to look at this, he sees this page is blank because he can't monitor anything because he only had create session. And I didn't do a test where I gave Bob a really big query to see if he could do real-time SQL monitor on his own queries and nobody else's. But as a DBA user, I can see all the queries that are running in the database. You can, since 22.4.2 of ORDS, so last year's ORDS, you can set it up so that the users, if they went to hostname/app/SQL developer, there would be a little button of, I would like a schema, please. And what happens is, and you go through a bunch of setup steps, Jeff has them documented here on his blog. What would happen then is the DBA gets a request and it says, hey, Joe would like a schema in this database. It takes a bunch to get it all set up. But if you wanted to do this to allow maybe users inside of your company to request a schema in a database, that's a capability that's available now. And now we have finished with database actions. And now we have finished with the 3 main topics that we're going to cover today. And what I'm going to do is, we actually, correct me if I'm wrong, we're actually a little ahead of time. So at Kscope, these were the topics that we covered. My conclusion, DBAs and sysadmins should deliver APEX and ORDS for all databases. The ORDS one, I can see some DBAs saying no, but APEX should automatically be in there. And I can take questions now, and then later what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue on and I'm going to show the 3 bonus sections that I didn't get to present at Kscope and just go through the content. Remember, if you have to bow out, then you can, and then just go find this on YouTube afterwards. Do we have any questions? Okay. Is ORDS standalone recommended for production scenarios where REST-enabled schemas and tables would be accessed from the internet outside the enterprise? Absolutely. apex.oracle.com does exactly that. ORDS standalone is being used. Now, do they have a proxy server in front of it that is, probably, right? They probably have a load balancing router in front of it. And, depending on the usage patterns that you have, that may or may not make sense. But you should never think, oh, because I am putting a production application on the internet, I shouldn't use ORDS standalone, and instead I should deploy ORDS to either WebLogic or Tomcat. I don't think they support Glassfish anymore. You can absolutely do the deployment where the ORDS portion runs in standalone mode. Any other questions? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is the 3 bonus extras. And again, if you only had an hour and you wanted to bow out now, totally okay. These 3 bonus extras are extras that I did not get a chance to cover at the Kscope event. But I pointed people at them and said, hey, content's in the presentation, and of course, all the code is available on that GitHub repository. So here's our bonus. 3 optional extras that you could do. One, we can create an APEX Resource Manager plan. Now this, I'm going to highly recommend for anybody that goes all the way to the step of building APEX applications using the browser-based UI and serving those up to your user community. An APEX Resource Manager plan is much better than the default Resource Manager plan built into the database. Next, in order to make ORDS easier to run, I'm going to create a systemd service to run ORDS. And then finally, I'm going to show you how you can run ORDS as the ORDS OS user. We're going to create an ORDS operating system user and run ORDS as that, so we're not running ORDS as root. So, number one, the Resource Manager plan. So let's talk about what a Resource Manager plan is and how it works. And basically what it is when people connect into the database, they connect in using a plan or a resource group. And that group sets limits possibly on what they can do. During the day, if you did show parameter resource manager plan, it would say the resource manager plan is null. So basically what you're getting is this plan, the internal plan. And the internal plan says this: if you connect to the database as an auto task user, you get one share, or in this case, 1%, because these numbers add up to 100, 1%. With a utilization limit of 90%. What this means is if there is contention in the database for resources, the auto task will only be able to ever use 90% of the database resources, and I will automatically reserve 10 for the other groups that are available. So in this case, remember, this only comes into place if there is contention in the database. So if we're running out of resources, limit this group to 90% utilization. And that's IO, memory, and CPU. The sys group gets up to 90, and other groups, and this is the default group for every user or schema that's created in the database, that you create. When we created Rich and Bob, they ended up in other groups. So by default, we have these three groups. The sys group is for system and sys users. Other groups is for everybody else. And the auto task is for some automatic things that the database does to tune itself while it's running. Now, this is during the day, and nights and weekends by default in the database are defined as Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. So that's a 4-hour window, Monday through Friday. And Saturday and Sunday from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. So during these windows, and remember this is database server time, if you do show parameter resource manager plan, you're going to see a new one, the default maintenance plan. That's the thing that is in effect in these time periods. And here you can see we've changed the allocation. We run more maintenance tasks at night, so we up these auto task things to 5%. We reduce sys groups to this, and other groups can actually get bumped up to 20%. I guess under the premise that maybe there's batch stuff going on. So the thing about this default maintenance plan is, it is really based on, hey, we're a company that works from 9 to 5 each day. Everybody goes home. We run batch jobs during the night, and we do maintenance during the night, and nobody's working during the weekend. So between you and me, this is actually a little antiquated, right? But this is how 99.9% of the databases that are out there are actually set up under this plan. So this is a little diagram. The internal plan is, remember, stuff that we do during days. The default maintenance plan is night and weekends. We have our 3 groups, and we switch back and forth between these plans, right? And during the day, these get 1, these get 5 during the night, et cetera, et cetera. You can kind of see this is how the database comes configured out of the box if you don't make any changes. So the first thing we're going to do is add 3 new groups. We're going to add an APEX high, an APEX medium, and an APEX low group. So these 3 groups have the potential, users have the potential to connect in. Now, we're going to put people in APEX high first. And we're going to set up the APEX users to connect to APEX high. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the percentages here. Now, an interesting thing happened. When the apex.oracle.com team deployed that site, they had the default plan going. And see how the auto tasks during the day only get 1% reserved when there is conflict? Interestingly, the APEX team found, and remember, apex.oracle.com has thousands and thousands and thousands of applications and or workspaces in it, probably hundreds of thousands of applications. It's huge. And one of the things they found is these internal plan, this 1% wasn't enough for all the auto tasks to necessarily finish when they were run, because they're typically run with some amount of time limit also. So they've actually came up with most of the stuff that's in this plan. So what we say here is, hey, APEX high, you get up to 40% of the server. And if you do too much in APEX high, then for that particular connection, we bump you down to APEX medium. We're reducing your resources. And then eventually, if you spend too much time in APEX medium, we bump you down to APEX low, and we set that 75% limit. And then actually you're going to see in the resource manager plan, if you stay too long in APEX low, we actually kill the session. And I'll describe how that works. And so this number says, hey, we're going to use 5% and that 90%. We've reduced the sys group, but the sys group is still the highest group. And the other groups, we change these. You can obviously change any of these numbers. And then what we're going to do is we're going to effectively get rid of the internal plan and the default maintenance plan. And we're going to set the APEX ratio plan as our plan that is in use all day, every day. Because that's the way the majority of websites work. People run them all day, every day. So we create those consumer groups, APEX high, medium, and low. We set switching, so you can switch from APEX high down to APEX medium, down to APEX low. And then we build this ratio-based plan, and we set the ratios, right? There's the 40, and the switch sign, 10. After 10 seconds, so here's the thing. We think every APEX page should be able to be generated in 10 seconds or less. And if it doesn't, something's going wrong. And so what we're going to do is, if the page takes longer than 10 seconds to generate, we're going to jump you down or drop you down into the APEX medium group. And there, you're going to get less resources. So now we can't have one user destroy the whole entire server. And if you think about apex.oracle.com, you go there, you have an account, you're playing around in your free workspace, everything just works. And if you think about what could be theoretically happening is one user could write the query from hell that consumes all the SGA, PGA, destroys everything. But it's this resource manager plan that prevents that from happening. This one, we stay there for 2 minutes in APEX medium, and our switch group is APEX low. We go into APEX low, we now have the lowest ratio. We can only use a max 75% of the server resources. And then after 30 minutes, there's this hidden group called cancel SQL. If you're trying to run an Apex page and it is taking longer than 30 minutes to generate that one page, something is fundamentally wrong. Let's kill it. Let's tune that SQL and make it work. And then we add the plans to the directives. We have to add the other plans, right? The other group is a mandatory group, the auto task and the sys groups. And then we configure the Apex public user initial consumer group. Where are you gonna, is the Apex public user gonna connect in? Apex High. And then I update the existing maintenance scheduler. So what I didn't want to do was, get rid of the default maintenance scheduler windows. So I just updated them all and I said, hey, instead of using your default maintenance plan, use my Apex ratio plan. And then I set it active, set the resource plan to be my Apex ratio plan. And it now is going to be set during the day and during the night. When we switch into these windows, we're going to switch to it again. And then we're going to switch back in the day. So we're kind of maintaining that default, this is the way the database works. And then I put in a comment, scope both, so it survives a reboot. And now I have a resource manager plan that will protect the database from a runaway Apex query and still allow the database to do everything it does. Now, one of the things that you could do is you could change the other groups to also do this Apex High thing if you were worried about some of the things that other users were doing. Be wary if you have like a large batch job that does a lot of work. You probably don't want to assign Apex High to that group as their initial resource consumer group. So the only thing that was changed is how the database allocates resources, and then the Apex public users initial resource consumer group is Apex High. If that particular user stays there too long, they go to Apex Medium, then Apex Low, then cancel. Optional extra number 2, we're going to create a systemd service for ORDS. So on a Unix server, systemd is the new tool to use to manage services that are running on our Unix server. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find that thing I started up with no hub and I'm going to kill it, right? So this is kind of messy, right? To stop ORDS from running, I have to kill a process. So what we're going to do is create an ORDS service in etc systemd system. We're going to put these settings in here, right? So C exec start is opt ORDS latest, bin ORDS config is the latest. We're going to serve, that's the command to serve it. When we kill it, systemd services automatically maintain the main process ID, and you can just do a kill with that. Notice that the current user is root. We're going to fix that later if you don't want to run ORDS as the root user. We reload the daemon, and that tells systemd, the systemd service running on the server, that there's now a new ords.service. We enable it. If we enable it, what happens is if I reboot application server, ORDS automatically starts up. This is optional. You don't have to enable it. But now if I want to start it, I just do systemctl start ORDS. A lot easier than typing out that whole no hub thing. If I want to see what's going on with ORDS, systemctl status ORDS, and I see the various things that are going on with the service itself, and then I see the latest log entries. If I want to read the logs, journal control is the command that I use. I use the -u with the ords.service, and it tells me, hey, here's the log entries that are in there. And if I want to stop ORDS, systemctl stop ORDS. So pretty straightforward and simple to do, and it makes managing ORDS much easier. And then our final optional extra is run ORDS as an Oracle, or excuse me, an ORDS OS user. So remember we said it doesn't really matter where you deploy ORDS, and it really doesn't matter. You know, this may be another user using ORDS standalone. If you've got system admins that are like, oh, there's no way we could run ORDS as root. That's not secure. We're not going to do it. Okay, that's what they're saying. Let's give them an out. Let's show them how they could fix this. So, you know, lots of times their tendency is to just say, oh, no, I'm not going to run ORDS because I don't want to run it as root. Instead, this is what we're going to do. So we're going to set up firewall, the firewall daemon. We're going to have the firewall listen on port 443. So to our users, everything's going to be running on port 443. The firewall daemon is then going to forward all of those requests to ORDS. This is my little ORDS icon, running on port 8080. And then, of course, ORDS gets into the database using port 1521, right? So this is what we're going to set up. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to stop ORDS. We're going to add an ORDS user to the operating system. We're going to change the ORDS configuration directory and runtime directory to be owned by ORDS. Technically, you don't have to do this, but it's not, you know, doesn't hurt in any way. Notice the -R for recursive, so all the files are going to be owned by the ORDS users now. I'm going to update my ORDS service. So remember that systemd service that I created? I'm going to just say the user is ORDS. So remember, before it was root, now it's ORDS. I am going to create an ords.xml file in my etc firewall d services directory. And basically, I'm going to say, hey, I need port 443 and port 8080 open, right? Because 443 is how the users are going to get there, and port 8080 is how the firewall is going to forward on to port 8080. I'm going to start up the firewall. If it wasn't already started, I was going to start it. If you do this and the firewall was running before, you might have to bounce the firewall so it knows about this ords.xml thing. I haven't totally tested that. And, you know, either way, if it doesn't work for some reason and your firewall was already running, restart the firewall. So systemctl restart firewall D. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a permanent add of ORDS. So this permanent means this is going to survive reboots and starts and stops of firewall D. Get a little success message. And now I'm going to add that port forward. So add the forward port. 443 is going to remap to 8080. And then this is the important step right here. We're going to add a masquerade. So what this means is if we didn't do this, people would come in under port 443 and they would get redirected to 8080, and then all their URLs would have 8080 in it. We don't want to do that. So we're going to masquerade that. And now we're going to say all these settings that we did in this runtime, let's make them permanent. So if we stop the firewall or reboot the application server, all these settings will come back. Now I'm going to go into my settings.xml in my ORDS configuration, and I'm going to take that HTTPS port and I'm going to update it to 8080. I'm now going to reload the daemon, and now what I'm going to do is, you know, the people that are going to go through this, they're going to say ORDS should be a service account that you can't even log into. We can do exactly that. Usermod-s, set the no login as the shell for the user, and then you can't even become the user. So this user is a lot like the Apache user or the Tomcat user that would get set up if you had those packages running on your application server. We start up ORDS, and it works. So that, my friends, is everything, including the content that the Kscope crowd didn't get. Now, they were live, and I think they asked a few more questions. I'm actually surprised to see it only took us an hour and 6 minutes to get through everything. So, again, DBAs and system admins should deliver APEX and ORDS for all databases. And do we have any extra questions now at this point? And that, my friends, is it. Thanks very much for everybody's time. We really appreciate it. Hopefully this will become a reference for folks to use on the internet going forward. And we'll see you all next time.
Thank you very much, all. Thank you for attending. Thank you to all our attendees. All right. Bye-bye.